Hey, what's going on, cash flow hackers? It is Chris with Life 180, and we are going to be going through this month's release of the CPI numbers, the inflation numbers for the United States. The Bureau of Labor Statistics just launched this morning, 6 a.m., so I'm just wanting to do this really quickly, kind of go through this. Everything that I said in last month's video basically happened, right? Like we're hitting the winter season. Energy inflation is still out of control. The costs of that energy inflation are going to be really, really catastrophic to a lot of people, especially in the colder environments where they got to pay for heating oil and gas and stuff like that. It really is. Inflation is heating up, so to speak. Here we are in November 2021. We look at the numbers last month. I said I thought inflation was going to hit 7% this month. We actually came in at 6.8. Rose up from the annual 6.2 from last month, and so it's a big bump. And so what I want to do now is I want to share the screen, and I want to go through just and highlight some of the key factors that are really that are really driving inflation right now, and that might have a direct impact on you. So here we go. I'm going to switch over. All right, so let's take a look at the PDF that they released for this year's numbers. And we're going to go to this, and you can see year over year, inflation has grown. It's all the way up. You could see last year, inflation was 2%, or 2%, 0.2%. This year, it's 0.8%. So I always like to look at this bar graph right here because it's really indicative of what's happening. Remember, it was March, April, May, June, kind of when inflation started getting out of control. The reason I'm saying this is that we had a little blip here, which is pretty common for summer because this is, a really big, those are small inflationary months historically, regardless. If you look back through history, it's pretty normal to see a dip there. Now, at the same time, I think with what's going on here, and I'm going to get into this a little bit as I go through some of the metrics and some of the specific categories inflation has been hitting people the worst, that what we're seeing here, the 0.9, 0.7, 0.6 this is going to be the norm moving forward. Like a low month is going to be 0.6. So we're at 6.8 inflation right now. That's because we had a 0.6%, basically 60 basis point jump from November of 2020 to here, that 0.8 minus 0.2 is 0.6. So you can see December, January, February, at least until March, we've got another 3 months after this that are going to be very at risk for inflation. And then even into the March realm, there's a little bit of risk there as well. Now, as we go through here, you can see the graph here about like what year over year inflation is looking like. You can see it's just kind of an upward curve here. Now let's just go through this. This is energy inflation is crazy. It's come down actually a little bit, to 33.3%. There was a time that was over 40%, which is crazy. Gasoline though, look at this. This is impacting a lot of people. Gasoline, 58.1%. That means gas right now, year over year, is 58% more expensive than it was last year. Fuel oil, 59.3%. That's what I'm talking about. If you live like where I'm from in Vermont, in the Northeast, in the Midwest, where it's getting cold already, and whatnot, like gas is getting expensive, fuel oil is getting expensive. So it's going to cost you 58% more to heat your home and keep your family safe this winter. Energy services are through the roof at 59.3% inflation. That's kind of crazy. Used cars and trucks. This is a huge jump, like 31. I don't remember what the exact number was, but last month that was like 24%. So we're up to 31% in used car inflation. And I think that's a big function of the supply chain problems that we're having. The fact that, we have a big issue with people, there not being as much supply for new cars. New vehicle inflation, you can see, is 11%. So that's happening. But what's happening is I think it's a supply chain issue, so there's not as many new cars available as they want, so there's more demand on the used car market. But on top of that, I think there's a lot of uncertainty about the economy, and so people, rather than going and buying new vehicles, they're being a little more conservative, they're flooding the used car market, and that is driving a supply and demand issue, right? And so that just is what it is. I'm not going to go through all that stuff. I just want to get down to the numbers of this and look at this. We got into this a little bit. I got to find the right column to. All right, let's look at the year over year change here. So November 2020 to November 21, this column right here in the middle is the number that matters. I'm looking at all this inflation for food. This is telling me all of the food, we're spending 6% more. That means if you had a $100 grocery bill last year, all things being equal, you have a $106.10 bill this year, right? Like if you spent, and that's even worse if you spend a lot of money on like dairy, poultry, fish, eggs, stuff like that, there's 12.8% inflation. So depending on how you shop, it is what it is. I already covered the energy, medical care, commodities. Actually, nope, used car and trucks. That's it. I saw 31%. I just misaligned it in my mind with my eyes. You can see a lot of this stuff is like, here's the month over month inflation. It's not so bad, but when you look at food and they break it down, cereal 4.6, 6.4. Remember, anything over 2% in any of these categories is what we would consider a little bit out of control because it's above the target metric of what the Federal Reserve is trying to do. Now, here's the deal, and this is what I want to say. Where we are right now, where you see the energy costs, where you see the food costs, where you see meats and poultry, all this stuff, the pressure on farmers, because remember, the trickle down on energy is going to hit all this because their fuel is used for everything in this country, right? It's used for farming, it's used for just transportation of all this stuff, and the trickle down effect of those costs is going to get passed along to the end product, the end user, right? And that is you, that is the retailers, and so on and so forth. And so you look at this, these pressures are bumped up a lot by the fuel inflation, right? And you look at bacon is 21% more expensive, beef, veal 20%, uncooked beef roast 26%, like beef steaks 24%, pork 16%. All these things, if you're using any of these things, which I think most Americans are, it's going to be a lot more expensive. Now, the biggest problem that we're facing right now is that this is all caused by a couple things. I think it's kind of like a three-pronged problem. We have the fact that we've been in this low interest rate environment for so long. The Federal Reserve is fueling this fire. I mean, they're pouring, at the risk of being funny, I suppose, is they're pouring gasoline on this fire, and the fuel costs are driving inflation out of control, right? Like they are causing problems by low interest rates for way too long. Remember, we hit 0% because of the last financial crisis, right? Think about that. We hit 0% because of the last financial crisis, and in that environment, we thought when we hit 0%, that would be all of the stimulation that the economy needed. That's the idea of an elastic currency. When things get tough, you can reduce interest rates. But the problem is it got worse, and government spending got out of control. And then we had quantitative easing, which meant the Federal Reserve was now not just reducing interest rates to 0%. They were pushing and buying bonds and securities and stuff like that to inject money with quantitative easing 1, QE2, QE3, and they were just buying all these things and pumping money into the economy for us, right? Now, so on top of low interest rates, they started doing that, buying over $100 billion of this stuff every single month for the United States. Like it's crazy, right? And that was keeping the economy going. So then what happens is, we never corrected the problem. They've still been doing all that money or spending all that money and like injecting all that money. They never raised interest rates. And so then what happens is COVID happens. And now rather than doing what they should do when our production goes down, they should have taken more money out of the supply and let things kind of deflate a little bit because we've been building a bubble over the last decade anyway. And inflation had never really been held because of the fact that there was no velocity of money. The money that was being injected into the economy was creating stability for companies and corporations and banks, and they had so much money on reserve, none of that money was hitting circulation. But then what happened is, because of COVID, we printed literally since September of 2019, which COVID happened right after that, we've printed over 30% that's ever been of the money, total money supply that's ever been printed in the United States history, right? I mean, trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. And so, but that money hit the economy. That money flooded the market. They created the forbearance programs for cars, for homes, for all these different things. So you couldn't get repossessed. People stopped paying their bills. The supply chain issues because the economy shut down. Things weren't being produced. So now we have this problem. Now, the government was saying, the Federal Reserve was, when this first started happening, was saying that inflation was transitory, meaning it was short term, and that once the supply chain problem was fixed, everything would be solved. Inflation would come down, we'd be under control. And the bottom line is that was always a lie. That was never going to be the case. I've been saying that from day one. The bottom line here is Jerome Powell this past week literally went on during the Fed meeting minutes, said that it's time to retire the word transitory because we're past that. Now, I think he's saying that we need to retire it now, but I think he knew the whole time that we were in an environment where that was going to be the case, right? So when we look at these numbers, we have to understand that it's Fed fueled because of low interest rates, it's Fed fueled because of the money printing, and it's government fueled because of their irresponsibility. We have to deal with this. The only way, if we look at history, and I'm gonna actually switch back. So if we look at history, and we really take a peek back at the last time we were in this situation, it was the late 70s. Inflation in 76, I think, or 77, started getting out of control. It got up to the 6-7% range, and we didn't deal with it, and it got really high, and we had what's called stagflation, which is what we're running into now, where inflation goes up, but the production levels along with it, the income levels, what everybody's earning, the production of the country doesn't increase with the rate of inflation. So that means the cost of everything goes up, but your quality of life and earning potential doesn't keep up with it. So what does that do? That creates an imbalance, and that actually stagflation is infinitely worse than inflation, because with inflation, you can do things to kind of keep up with it. When you have stagflation, the working class, the middle class America, even the lower class America especially, is hit the worst because their incomes don't rise. And so therefore, when they go to buy food, when they go to buy gas, when they go to do all these different things, that cost goes up. Even real estate goes up. The cost of rent goes up. Everything, the cost of living in general across the board goes up. So unless you are invested in those assets, and unless you have income that's derived from, that's inflation protected, you are stuck. And this is all a function of the government. It's all a function of the Federal Reserve policies. And it's really going to take a hero, so to speak. I need a hero. I think about that Footloose song back in the 80s, right? We need a hero to come up like Paul Volcker was in 1979. Who's going to say, listen, this is out of control. The only way that we're going to resolve this is by raising interest rates. If we do not raise interest rates, this will have a problem. We will have an issue. We're going to have runaway inflation. We're going to have stagflation, which is really worse. It's going to have a super negative impact on all of middle America's lives. And I'm telling you right now, we can't afford that as a country. The world really can't afford that. So I'm just kind of looking down through here to look at the inflation numbers, and it's pretty crazy. Just the cost of food and energy and healthcare, and all these things. The trickle down effect of energy in this country. Remember, it's insane. Rent inflation is 32%. I'm gonna share this one more time. So rent inflation, look at this, rent and shelter, 32% inflation right there. It's nuts. Lodging, rent, primary residence is up 7.5%. Owner equivalent rent residence is 23%. It's pretty crazy. Like, this is the kind of stuff where the cost of living is nuts. And, it's kind of like beating this topic dead, so to speak, that this is the same conversation every single month. This winds up being the same conversation every single month, because until they change the policy, until they raise interest rates to rein in inflation, And as long as they keep buying, I mean, remember, they're saying that they're tapering. The Federal Reserve says they're tapering. And instead of buying $110 billion a month, they're going to drop it to $100 billion. But remember, they're still inflating $100 billion into the economy every single month when they're doing that. And so if that's ultimately what's happening, there's still a problem. They're still pouring gasoline on the fire. They're not pouring it on the fire as fast, but they're still pouring it on the fire. And so this inflation problem is not going to get better. So it's one of the biggest reasons that I love our strategies, and why I'm so passionate about our strategies, and why I've been doing this for a long time, is because we knew this time was coming. This is when you get wealthy, is if you are not prepared, if you don't have your assets positioned to take advantage of these environments, you are going to get hurt. And I'm a big believer that, first of all, I'm passionate about the fact that, I believe in humanity. I believe that we're going to come together. I think people ultimately are going to hit a breaking point, and we're going to unite and realize, like, okay, like some of this crap has got to come to an end, and we got to do what's right. And what's right is just looking at the math and looking at the economics and making sure that we do what we have to do. And if we understand, you don't, as a heroin addict, you don't get sober and clean after you've been overdosing or taking high doses of heroin for a long period of time, right? And being numb to what's going on around you. If you want to get clean and sober and healthy and get back to living a good life as an addict, you got to go through pain, right? Like, we have to go through that pain right now. We have to. There is 0% chance we get out of this alive as a country, as an economy, without going through pain. And the problem is, our politicians are always trying to kick the can down the road and avoid that pain because they're too worried about getting reelected and not worried enough about doing what's right for you and me and the rest of the country. And so what we need to make sure that we all just acknowledge we need to deal with that pain. And whether we want to acknowledge that or not, we're going to have to deal with it eventually, because the laws, the principles of this stuff are not going to be defeated for long. Now, the government can manipulate it, can kick the can down the road for a certain period of time. I'm not disputing that. They've done it beautifully for a decade now. But at some point in time, that has to come to an end. I'm not going to be audacious enough to say that I can call or pick out in time when that's going to happen. But what I will say is that it's going to happen. It's not if, it's when. And so I don't know if it's 6 months from now or 6 years from now. There's a lot of variables that come into that. But I do believe that what you do with your money and how you position yourself financially with your assets, and kind of what you do for the next year to 2 years on the outside, how you position yourself for when the market goes into a decline, is going to have an impact, and is going to have a direct impact on what the rest of your life looks like, on your wealth potential. You're either going to suffer from this, or you're going to be able to thrive from it and take advantage of the opportunities. So that's it. I hope that makes sense. There's a lot of stuff going on here. This inflation conversation, I don't mean to be a fearmonger about this. I like, by no means, because I do believe we're going to gain control of this. But like I said, Paul Volcker came in, was a hero in 1979, and said, hey, this inflation is out of control. Federal funds rate back then was 6%. He raised it to 19%, virtually overnight. So imagine if the federal funds rate at 0 right now were raised to 6%. Even if they kept printing and injecting $100 billion into the economy and didn't taper that, if they just raise interest rates, it's going to crush the economy. But the problem is, I don't know if they're going to. Because of the fact that they're not keeping interest rates low just for you and me. They're keeping interest, but what I mean by saying that is, when they keep interest rates low, that keeps the cost of everything down. It makes it so your auto loans are low. It makes it so your mortgage rates are lower. So that keeps, therefore, it keeps the real estate market inflated, right? Because your house isn't worth $500,000. Your house is worth a $2,500 mortgage payment, right? Or a $2,600, whatever that winds up being. And so that's a big thing. If they raise interest rates now to buy that same $500,000 house, maybe it's a $3,200 mortgage payment. So if what you can afford is $2,600, you can afford a lighter house, and therefore house values will come down to meet you where you are. That's just supply and demand and economics. And so that's the biggest thing I can say is we are in a situation where interest rates have to go up, but they're not going to, because the fact is we're $30 trillion in debt as a country. And so what people don't realize is that if interest rates go up, the actual liability, interest liability on our debt, as soon as we get to a 5% federal funds rate, which is the long-term healthy rate, long-term average of the federal funds rate up until the mid-2000s, throughout the history of the economy, since the Federal Reserve was started in 1913, it's about 5%. And so if you look at that 5% number, and we were to raise it there, the cost to service the interest on our debt, which is basically, you might as well light that money on fire to make the minimum payments just to service the interest, think about it like a credit card, is going to be higher than our defense budget. People freak out about the defense budget. Imagine what it's going to look like when we don't even get tanks and airplanes and jets and missiles and defense and stuff like that. I don't care how you feel about defense. A lot of people think we overspend. A lot of people think we don't spend enough. But that aside, when we're spending more for interest than we're spending on defense, that becomes a big problem. And we are going to get to that point, and it's going to be a scary point. So anyway, if you haven't already, please share this, give it a like, smash it out. More people need to see this. Hopefully this was very helpful, gave you some insight, understanding about where we are. Like I said, I'm not fear-mongering. I believe we will get through this, but I also believe there's going to be a 2 to 3 to 4 year window at minimum that is going to be significantly challenging. We're going to have to go through pain before we can get better. We have to go through that detox period. We just have to. And so what you do to prepare for that, what you do to position yourself to take advantage of the inevitable opportunities that are going to be available in that time frame, is basically going to be a make it or break it for a lot of Americans in this world, and actually a lot of Canadians, Americans, people all over the place, because the reality is what we do in America has a direct impact on the rest of the world as well, because we are the world's reserve currency. So anyway, hope that makes sense. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell, that way you get notified every time we launch a new video, because I got a lot of videos coming out on this topic. And that's it for now. Have a blessed, inspirational day. Stay positive. Go out and crush it. We'll see you on the next video. Take care.